Recording by Peter Eastman. The Legion of Lazarus by Edmond Hamilton. It isn't the dying itself. It's what comes before. The waiting, alone in a room without windows, trying to think. The opening of the door, the voices of the men who are going with you, but not all the way. The walk down the corridor to the airlock room. The faces of the men, closed and impersonal. They do not enjoy this. Neither do they shrink from it. It's their job. This is the room. It is small, and it has a window. Outside there is no friendly sky, no clouds. There is space, and there is the huge red circle of Mars filling the sky, looking down like an enormous eye upon this tiny moon. But you do not look up. You look out. There are men out there. They are quite naked. They sleep upon the barren plain, drowsing in a timeless ocean. Their bodies are white as ivory, and their hair is loose across their faces. Some of them seem to smile. They lie and sleep, and the great red eye looks at them forever, as they are born around it. "It isn't so bad," says one of the men who are with you inside this ultimate room. 50 years from now, the rest of us will all be old or dead." It is small comfort. The one garment you have worn is taken from you, and the lock door opens, and the fear that cannot possibly become greater does become greater. And then suddenly that terrible crescendo is past. There is no longer any hope, and you learn that without hope there is little to be afraid of. You want now only to get it over with. You step forward into the lock. The door behind you shuts. You sense that the one before you is opening, but there is not much time. The burst of air carries you forward. Perhaps you scream, but you are now beyond sound, beyond sight, beyond everything. You do not even feel that it is cold. Chapter 1. There is a time for sleep, and a time for waking. But Hurst had slept heavily, and the waking was hard. He had slept long, and the waking was slow. 50 years, said the dim voice of remembrance. But another part of his mind said, no, it is only tomorrow morning. Another part of his mind. That was strange. There seemed to be more parts to his mind than he remembered having had before, but they were all confused and hidden behind a veil of mist. Perhaps they were not really there at all. Perhaps. 50 years. I have been dead, he thought, and now I live again. Half a century. Strange. Hurst lay on a narrow bed, in a place of subdued light and antiseptic-smelling air. There was no one else in the room. There was no sound. 50 years, he thought. What is it like now? The house where I lived once, the country, the planet. Where are my children? Where are my friends, my enemies, the people I loved, the people I hated? Where is Elena? Where is my wife? A whisper out of nowhere, sad, remote. Your wife is dead, and your children are old. Forget them. Forget the friends and the enemies. But I can't forget, cried Hurst silently in the spaces of his own mind. It was only yesterday. 50 years, said the whisper, and you must forget. MacDonald, said Hurst suddenly. I didn't kill him. I was innocent. I can't forget that. Careful, said the whisper. Watch out. I didn't kill MacDonald. Somebody did. Somebody let me pay for it. Who? Was it Landers? Was it Saul? We four were together out there on Titan when he died. Careful, Hurst. They're coming. Listen to me. You think this is your own mind speaking, question and answer, but it isn't. Hurst sprang upright on the narrow bed, his heart pounding, the sweat running cold on his skin. Who are you? Where are you? How? They're here, said the whisper calmly. Be quiet. 2 men came into the ward. I am Dr. Meridew, said the one in the white coverall, smiling at Hurst with a brisk professional smile. This is Warden Meister. We didn't mean to startle you. There are a few questions before we release you. Meridew, said the whisper in Hurst's mind, is a psychiatrist. Let me handle this. Hurst sat still, his hands lax between his knees, his eyes wide and fixed in astonishment. He heard the psychiatrist's questions, and he heard the answers he gave to them, but he was merely an instrument, with no conscious volition. It was the whisperer in his mind who was answering. Then the warden shuffled some papers he held in his hand, and asked questions of his own. You underwent the humane penalty without admitting your guilt. For the record, now that the penalty has been paid, do you wish to change your final statements? The voice in Hurst's mind, the secret voice, said swiftly to him, Don't argue with them, don't get angry, or they'll keep you on and on here. But, thought Hurst, I know you're innocent, but they'll never believe it. They'll keep you on for further psychiatric tests. They might get near the truth, Hurst. The truth about us. Suddenly, Hurst began to understand. Not all and not clearly. Something of what had happened to him. The obscuring mists began to lift from the borders of his mind. What is the truth? He asked in that inner quiet. About us. You've spent 50 years in the Valley of the Shadow. You're changed, Hurst. You're not quite human any more. No one is who goes through the freeze, but they don't know that. Then you too? Yes, and I too changed. And that is why our minds can speak, even though I am on Mars and you are on its moon. But they must not know that, so don't argue, don't show emotion. The warden was waiting. Hurst said aloud to him, slowly, I have no statement to make. The warden did not seem surprised. He went on. According to your papers here, you also denied knowing the location of the Titanite for which MacDonald was presumably murdered. Do you still deny that? Hurst was honestly surprised. But surely by now... The warden shrugged. According to this data, it never came to light. I never knew, said Hurst, where it was. Well, said the warden, I've asked the question, and that's as far as my responsibility goes. But there's a visitor who has permission to see you. He and the doctor went out. Hurst watched them go. He thought, so I'm not quite human. Not quite human anymore. Does that make me more or less than a man? Both, said the secret voice. Their minds are still closed to you. Only our minds, we who have changed too, are open. Who are you? Asked Hurst. My name is Shearing. Now listen. When you are released, they'll bring you down here to Mars. I'll be waiting for you. I'll help you. Why? Why do you care about me, or a murder 50 years old? I'll tell you why later, said the whisper of Shearing, but you must follow my guidance. There's danger for you, Hurst, from the moment you're released. There are those who have been waiting for you. Danger, but... The door opened, and Hurst's visitor came in. He was a man something over 60, but the deep lines in his face made him look older. His face was gray and drawn and twitching, but it became perfectly rigid and white when he came to the foot of the bed and looked at Hurst. There was rage in his eyes, a rage so old and weary that it brought tears to them. "You should have stayed dead," he said to Hurst. "Why couldn't they let you stay dead?" Hurst was shocked and startled. "Who are you, and why—" The other man was not even listening. His eyelids had closed, and when they opened again, they looked on naked agony. "It isn't right," he said. "A murderer should die and stay dead, not come back." "I didn't murder MacDonald," Hurst said, with the beginnings of anger, "and I don't know why you—" He stopped. The white, aging face, the tear-filled, furious eyes, he did not quite know what there was about them, but it was there, like an old remembered face peeping up through a blur of water for a moment and then withdrawing again. After a moment, Hurst said hoarsely, "What's your name?" "You wouldn't know it," said the other. "I changed it long ago." Hurst felt a cold, and it seemed that he could not breathe. He said, "But you were only 11. He could not go on. There was a terrible silence between them. He must break it. He could not let it go on. He must speak. But all he could say was to whisper, "I'm not a murderer. You must believe it. I'm going to prove it." "You murdered MacDonald, and you murdered my mother. I watched her age and die, spending every penny, spending every drop of her blood and ours to get you back again. I pretended for 50 years that I too believed you were innocent, when all the time I knew." Hurst said, "I'm innocent." He tried to say a name, too, but he could not speak the word. "No, you're lying, as you lied then. We found out. Mother hired detectives, experts, over and over for decades, and always they found the same thing. Landers and Saul could not possibly have killed MacDonald, and you were the only other human being there. Proof? I can show you barrels of it. And all of it proof that my father was a murderer." He leaned a little toward Hurst, and the tears ran down his lined, careworn face. He said, "All right, you've come back. Alive, still young. But I'm warning you. If you try again to get that titanite, if you shame us all again after all this time, if you even come near us, I'll kill you." He went out. Hurst sat, looking after him, and he thought that no man before him had ever felt what tore him now. Inside his mind came Shearing's whisper, with a totally unexpected note of compassion. "But some of us have, Hurst. Welcome to the Brotherhood. Welcome to the Legion of Lazarus." End of Chapter 1.